Benny Andersson once said that ABBA's biggest hits felt like magic, but for Agnetha, they were a prison. What he's only now admitting is the devastating conversation they had just minutes before she vanished from the public eye, a secret that changes everything you thought you knew about the golden girl of pop. For decades, the world has placed the blame for Agnetha Fältskog's heartbreaking retreat from the world squarely on the shoulders of her ex-husband, Björn Ulvaeus. We have all heard the endless stories of their agonizing divorce playing out in the recording studio. But that narrative is a convenient distraction. The true architect of Agnetha's isolation was not the man who broke her heart, but the man who broke her voice. Benny Andersson, the relentless musical genius behind the biggest pop act in history, has harbored an unspoken regret. Today, we uncover the chilling reality of what happened inside the soundproof walls of Polar Studios, and how the pursuit of absolute sonic perfection cost a woman her freedom. Let us step back into the late 1970s, an era where ABBA completely dominated the global airwaves. To the outside observer, they were a glittering spectacle of Swedish pop royalty, adorned in sequins and radiating pure, infectious joy. Agnetha, with her iconic blonde hair and crystalline soprano, was the undisputed face of this global phenomenon. She was an idol, adored by millions from London to Tokyo. However, behind the flashbulbs and platinum records, a very different ecosystem existed. Benny Andersson was not merely playing the piano. He was composing intricate, multi-layered symphonies masked as 3-minute pop songs. His ambition was terrifyingly vast. He was constructing a European answer to Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, demanding a level of vocal precision that bordered on the superhuman. While the tabloids obsessively chronicled the romantic disentanglement of the band's two couples, they entirely missed the psychological warfare occurring at the mixing desk. Agnetha was not just singing. She was being used as a biological instrument, pushed to the absolute limits of her physical and emotional endurance. The world thought she was retreating from a broken marriage, but she was actually fleeing from a relentless maestro who demanded pieces of her soul for every single master tape. To understand the true tragedy, we must strip away the sequined costumes and examine the ruthless anatomy of a pop masterpiece. Let us examine exactly how this pressure manifested. The first undeniable example lies in the recording process of the monumental track "The Winner Takes It All." While Björn penned the devastating lyrics about their very own divorce, it was Benny who structured the soaring, unforgiving melodic arrangement. Agnetha was forced to stand in a dimly lit booth and sing the story of her own shattered family over and over again. Benny demanded countless takes, stripping away any raw, messy emotion to achieve a polished, crystalline despair. He was not capturing her pain, he was choreographing it for mass consumption. Second, consider the grueling schedule of their vocal layering. ABBA's signature sound relied on a technique called double tracking, but Benny pushed this into absolute overdrive. Agnetha and Anni-Frid were routinely forced to sing the exact same harmony lines dozens of times to create a massive, synthetic chorus effect. Agnetha's soprano, already delicate and incredibly high in the register, was subjected to microscopic scrutiny. A single breath out of place, a microtonal waver in pitch, meant stopping the tape and starting over from the beginning. The psychological toll of hearing your own voice dissected and rejected for weeks on end is immense. Third, there was the total erasure of her own musical autonomy. Agnetha was a prolific songwriter and producer in her own right before ever joining the band. She had topped the Swedish charts with her own original compositions. Yet within the rigid, male-dominated hierarchy of ABBA, her creative voice was completely silenced. Benny and Björn held an iron grip on the writing credits and production choices. Agnetha became a highly tuned vessel for Benny's musical visions, a mere session singer in a band where she was supposed to be a star. Her artistic identity was slowly suffocated under the weight of his undeniable, yet entirely dictatorial genius. You might assume that creating some of the most beloved music in human history would be a source of profound healing and satisfaction. Conventional wisdom tells us that artists pour their trauma into their art and emerge cathartically cleansed. But the reality inside Polar Studios violently contradicts this notion. The very success of the music became the weapon of her destruction. The more flawless the record sounded, the more alienated Agnetha became from her own creation. When you listen to Dancing Queen, you hear unadulterated euphoria. But counterintuitively, the joy we consume from that record is extracted directly from the exhaustion of its creators. Benny's relentless pursuit of major chord perfection required a suppression of actual human darkness. Every soaring chorus was built on a foundation of suppressed anxiety. We have historically framed Benny as the jovial, bearded savant, happily pounding the keys while the emotional drama swirled around Björn and the girls. This is a profound miscalculation. The true tragedy is that Benny's love for the music entirely superseded his empathy for the vocalist. He operated under the dangerous assumption that great art justifies infinite collateral damage. By viewing Agnetha merely as a frequency on an equalizer rather than a grieving mother and exhausted performer, he unwittingly constructed a golden cage. The public watched her grow increasingly distant, labeling her a recluse or an ungrateful diva. In truth, she was displaying the classic textbook symptoms of severe occupational burnout and sensory overload. The music industry praises perfectionism, but rarely calculates the devastating human cost of achieving it. It is a terrifying realization that the upbeat soundtrack to millions of weddings and parties was built on the systematic dismantling of a woman's psychological well-being. To fully comprehend the mechanical brutality of this environment, we must dissect the technical reality of 70s analog recording. Before the advent of digital pitch correction and auto-tune, achieving the legendary ABBA sound required terrifying physical discipline. Benny would often utilize a technique where the backing tracks were intentionally sped up slightly during playback. Agnetha would then have to sing her harmonies to this unnaturally fast, artificially bright track. When played back at normal speed, her voice sounded impossibly angelic, shimmering with an ethereal quality that no human could naturally produce in real time. This technique, known as varuspeeding, physically strained her vocal cords to the breaking point. She was essentially racing against a machine to hit notes that shouldn't mathematically exist in human biology. Furthermore, Benny heavily relied on extremely close miking techniques. A microphone was placed mere inches from her mouth to capture every single transient sound. Every swallow, every slight intake of breath, every crackle of vocal fatigue was captured on massive 2-inch analog tape. There was nowhere to hide, no digital trickery to smooth out a rough take. This hyper-intimate recording setup meant she could not simply sing. She had to perform with surgical precision while under a terrifying sonic microscope. When Benny introduced the Yamaha GX1 synthesizer into their soundscape, things grew even more complicated. The dense, symphonic textures generated by this massive machine left very little sonic space for the human voice. Agnetha had to punch through walls of synthesized strings and heavy bass lines, forcing her to project her voice with unnatural force just to be heard in the final mix. When you understand the sheer physical endurance required to execute these complex, syncopated vocal runs, the illusion of effortless pop magic shatters entirely. The studio environment itself, devoid of natural light and entirely soundproofed, became a sensory deprivation tank where the only input was Benny's voice through the talkback microphone, relentlessly demanding one more take, hour after hour, day after day. It was a relentless cycle of mechanical repetition that systematically broke down her natural joy for singing, replacing it with a paralyzing fear of microscopic failure. Look closely at the final years of the band to see this dynamic fully realized and completely tragic. During the recording of their final studio album, The Visitors, the atmosphere was notoriously toxic. Listen closely to the track slipping through my fingers. The song requires a devastatingly fragile vocal delivery. Benny, completely consumed by the intricate sonic architecture of the new album, kept pushing for a colder, more detached sound. The incredible warmth that characterized their early hits was entirely stripped away. The synthesizers became glacial, and Agnetha's voice was heavily processed to sound isolated and hollow. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy captured forever on vinyl. Or consider the track The Day Before You Came. It is an absolute masterpiece of synthesized melancholy. Agnetha's vocal is entirely devoid of vibrato, singing a hauntingly monotonous melody over Benny's relentless, ticking drum machine. She sounds exactly like a ghost haunting her own life. This was not an incredible acting choice. This was the terrifying sound of a woman completely depleted, singing a masterpiece that served as her own musical obituary. The genius of Benny's arrangement only highlights the sheer exhaustion of the instrument delivering it. The vibrant, dancing pop star was gone, replaced by a haunting echo trapped inside a synthesizer grid. The heartbreaking reality is that Benny Andersson did not set out maliciously to destroy Agnetha Fältskog. He was simply a man entirely consumed by the limitless possibilities of his own imagination, completely blind to the fact that his canvas was a living, breathing human being. The hits that soundtrack our greatest celebrations were forged in an absolute crucible of silent suffering. Understanding this completely rewrites the legacy of the ultimate pop machine. It forces us to ask whether the timelessness of the music was worth the total destruction of the muse. But Agnetha's story is only one piece of the much darker puzzle hidden within the music industry's golden age. If you think the psychological pressure inside ABBA was intense, you need to understand the terrifying control mechanisms employed by the record executives who originally signed them to their contracts. The deals they were forced into reveal a level of corporate manipulation that makes the recording studio sessions look like child's play. We will break down exactly how those legal chains were forged and who profited from their destruction in our next deep dive.